I'm going to make an approximately 15-minute presentation. I'm going to try and keep my remarks fairly brief. In my conversations with Gabby, she has stressed to me that you all have a number of very legitimate, justified questions. And I kind of want to get to that Q&A time. I think that's more important than my presentation, to be quite honest, having reviewed the questions that Gabby passed on to me. But I will spend just a little time talking about the envisioned global nature of the Global Methodist Church that's still in formation. And so why I will only spend a little time talking about that envisioned global nature of the Global Methodist Church is because it is still being formed. We have a transitional book of doctrines and discipline, but I often stress to people that the most important word right now in the name of that book, Transitional Book of Doctrines and Discipline, is the word transitional. We have a long way to go yet, and we want everybody who wants to be a part of the Global Methodist Church to have a say in its formation. So while I will briefly talk about the global nature of the Global Methodist Church, I want to remind you that we are in formation and we have a long way to go. And so there's not a whole lot to be said just yet on the global nature of the church, because we want everybody to have a say in that. And that can't be fully accomplished until the Global Methodist Church, currently in formation, has its convening general conference, where delegates from all around the world are duly elected from their various regions of the world, who can come and speak into what the formation and the global nature of the church will actually look like, okay? And so after I talk a little bit about that, I'll then turn my attention to giving you a brief overview of where we think things stand regarding the very important protocol of reconciliation and grace through separation and the 2022 General Conference. We really can't launch, or we won't be able to launch in the most effective way possible, the Global Methodist Church until we get a vote on the protocol of reconciliation and grace through separation at a general conference. So I'll touch on those things. And finally, I'll just briefly close by touching on one issue regarding the formation of the Global Methodist Church that has raised a number of questions over the past year. It's a question having to do with the nature of the leadership of the Global Methodist Church. And so I'll touch on that briefly. So let me just talk a few moments about the global nature of the Global Methodist Church. There are really three distinctives about the global nature of the Global Methodist Church that actually should be familiar to most of us. We will be global in the sense that we will be local churches of worshiping bodies who are connected together in annual conferences, and then in regional conferences, and then finally in a general conference that connects us all together so that we are making decisions together as partners with one another. And all of those ways that we are connected, or those principal ways that we are connected, will all be united around the authority of Scripture, the core confessions of the Christian faith as stated in the Apostles' and Nicene creeds. And we will have a warm-hearted, passionate, Methodist distinctive way of articulating and sharing that faith, that Methodist, whether they are United Methodist, Free Methodist, Wesleyans, on down the line. As you all know, there are many different kinds of Methodists, but we all share that distinctive of that warm-hearted, passionate way of sharing Jesus Christ that was taught to us by our founder, John Wesley, and those who ignited the Methodist movement in the middle to late 18th century. So those are really the core distinctives. They should seem similar to a lot of us. We at the WCA, at the Wesley Covenant Association, and theologically conservative United Methodist, whether they live in Africa or Eurasia, Eastern Europe, the Philippines, or the US, our concern with the direction of the United Methodist Church has never really been around the way that we are connected and our global nature. Our frustration with the United Methodist Church is leadership that refuses to fulfill their vows, to defend our teachings, to promote them, and to defend them. And that's what's got us in the situation where we are now literally on the cusp of creating a new denomination. So those are the really global distinctives, the global nature of how the Global Methodist Church will look. And we can get more into that if you'd like when we get into the Q&A time. And I know that we will, because I've reviewed some of those questions. I want to move on real quickly because I know this is a big issue for United Methodist all around the country, and that all around the world is, where do things stand with the protocol of reconciliation and grace through separation? This is an important issue, as you all know, and there was a lot of excitement back in January of 2020 when the mediation team who negotiated the protocol announced that they had reached an agreement and were working on implementing legislation that would come to the May 2020 General Conference. Initially, it caught everybody by surprise and everybody was taken aback. But within about 2 months, many people rallied around the protocol and were supportive of it. And when I mean many people, many United Methodists, whether they considered themselves traditionalist, theologically conservative United Methodist, whether they consider themselves sort of centrist United Methodist, or whether they consider themselves to be progressives. The vast majority of them had come around almost immediately to supporting the protocol. And so had we had a general conference in 2020 that we all know was postponed by the pandemic and then postponed again. But had we had a general conference in 2020, it would almost certainly have passed at that time. Since we've had almost 2 years now have gone by, there are some people who are not as supportive of the protocol as they originally were. But we think the odds are better than 50% that the protocol will be approved. And so we are continuing at the Wesleyan Covenant Association, we're continuing to advise local churches and districts and annual conferences and central conferences to prepare accordingly. We believe everyone should be preparing for the general conference to occur and for the passage of the protocol. We think the protocol will pass for a number of reasons, but I'm going to give you 3 reasons why we think the protocol will ultimately pass at the general conference. First, the mediation team that hammered out the protocol, all the team members to continue to support the protocol. And that is very significant given the theological diversity among the mediation team members. Bishop Cynthia Harvey, who at the time of the negotiation of the protocols was the president of the Council of Bishops, Bishop Ken Carter, who's a past president of the Council of Bishops, and a number of other leading bishops were part of the mediation team. They continue to support the protocol. And then leaders representing centrist, progressive, and traditionalist advocacy groups in the United Methodist Church all continue to say they are supportive of the passage of the protocol. Second, the influential African Initiative Group staunchly supports the protocol. The African Initiative Group is very well connected with General Conference delegates throughout Africa. And as many of you know, about 33% of the General Conference delegates come from Africa. And they are telling us that they want to see an end to the bitter dispute that takes place every 4 years when they come to General Conference, and then having to return home to explain the situation in the denomination to members of their local churches in their home countries. They want that to stop. Our African Initiative leaders tell us that many of the General Conference delegates in Africa want the protocol adopted so that African local churches and annual conferences and central conferences can have the opportunity to vote to join the Global Methodist Church as soon as possible. A third reason why we think the protocol will pass is that very theologically diverse annual conferences here in the United States have adopted resolutions in the past year calling on their General Conference delegates to vote for the protocol. An annual conference in the Washington, D.C. area, an annual conference in the state of Georgia here in the U.S., an annual conference in Texas, and an annual conference in California. These are very different parts of our country, some of them very conservative, some of them very progressive. All of these annual conferences have voted almost 2-1 in support of the protocol. They are calling on their General Conference delegates from their annual conferences to support the protocol when we get there. So we think those are really strong signs that when the delegates do get to General Conference, they will ultimately vote to pass the protocol of reconciliation and grace through separation. Now I'm going to quickly turn and talk about the 2022 General Conference. I would say about 2 months ago, many people were of the mind that we would not have General Conference, that it would be postponed again. As many of you know, we were 2 or 3 months ago, we were still, the world was reeling from the Delta variant of the COVID-19 pandemic. And many people just continued to think it would be impossible to hold a General Conference in late August, early September of 2022. But we are now guardedly optimistic that the 2022 General Conference will meet as scheduled later this year in Minneapolis, Minnesota, here in the US in late August, early September of this year. Why we think that is because we are seeing more and more organizations, whether they're large businesses, whether they're large sporting events, nonprofit organizations, large church denominations, all of them are finding ways to go about their work in person and holding large gatherings when required to do that. I am aware of a large group of medical doctors, they're pediatricians, who are planning an event with pediatricians from all around the world that will be meeting in late April, early May of this year. They canceled their large gathering the last 2 years, but even these doctors are planning to get together. 8,000 to 9,000 of them are planning an in-person meeting in late April and early May of this year. So we believe that people all around the world, despite the challenges of the pandemic, are finding ways to do their business and move on despite the challenges of the pandemic. And we think that the United Methodist Church can do that as well. Also, you might recently be aware that the Wesleyan Covenant Association, we have joined with other advocacy groups in the United Methodist Church to launch an initiative to help all General Conference delegates get vaccinated against the COVID-19 pandemic. We are particularly focused on helping people in countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, where vaccines are available. There are vaccines available, but the major obstacle is helping people get to clinics where they can get vaccinated. And so, although we have just started this initiative, we are very encouraged by reports from Africa that many delegates in Africa, many General Conference delegates in Africa are already fully vaccinated, and many others are availing themselves of our initiative so they can get vaccinated as well. We also know that a number of centrist and progressive leaders here in the US believe it is very important for the Church to hold a general conference this year. And we are confident that the staff members of the Commission on General Conference are doing all they can to facilitate an in-person general conference, or at a minimum, some kind of hybrid conference. But we think it's highly likely that we will have an in-person general conference this year, just because of what we see going on in other places in the world and here in the United States. We acknowledge that the pandemic is real and ongoing. We certainly acknowledge that, but we believe that the Church can and must do all it can to hold an in-person general conference this year, and that we get a vote on the protocol so everybody can move forward. Now, allow me to give you a very brief report on some developments regarding the formation of the Global Methodist Church. The 16-member Transitional Leadership Council, the body that announced the formation of the Global Methodist Church almost 1 year ago, continues to meet almost weekly, and they are making good progress across a number of fronts in getting ready to launch the Global Methodist Church. But there are some concerns among people who are interested in joining the Global Methodist Church. And one of the biggest issues that has come to the fore over the past year is the actions of several United Methodist Church bishops in the US this past year has provoked a number of questions about whether the Global Methodist Church should even have bishops in the new church. Theologically conservative United Methodists around the world are very frustrated with mostly US bishops, and not all of them, but some of them. They're frustrated with US bishops who, when they vowed to be bishops, they vowed to teach and defend the ethical standards of the United Methodist Church, but some of them have violated their vows by tolerating defiance of those ethical standards. And in some cases, in a handful of cases, some bishops have even encouraged the violation of some of our ethical standards. And that's created a great deal of frustration with a number of theological conservative United Methodists wherever they live in the world. And so some are questioning whether the Global Methodist Church should have bishops. Some people have naturally turned to the Transitional Book of Doctrines and Discipline on the Global Methodist Church's website to learn about bishops and appointments. And what they've read concerns some of them. They worry that bishops will continue to have too much authority to arbitrarily appoint pastors without proper consultation with their local church and with the leadership at their local church and they serve. We're trying hard to allay those concerns and reminding people that what you read right now in the Transitional Book of Doctrines and Discipline is just simply transitional. We do not expect that the leadership during the time of transition will need to make a lot of appointments. We're hoping they have to only make a few appointments of pastors during that transitional time. And we want to wait and allow the duly elected delegates from all around the world to the convening conference for the Global Methodist Church to ultimately make decisions about the polity and the organization of the Global Methodist Church. So we think we'll be fine because we think that when we all get together, we will make good decisions about the way to move forward together. The council recognizes that it is not their place to establish, and I'm talking about the Transitional Leadership Council, it recognizes it's really not its place to make a lot of broad decisions about the formation of the Global Methodist Church. They're just trying to help us get from that place when the church can officially launch to the convening General Conference, which will be a period of about 12 to 18 months. So with the turn of the new year, the Global Methodist Church in formation, it will steadily increase its level of communications so that people can learn more and more about the church in formation, and most importantly, how they can join it, how they can join the Global Methodist Church in formation so that they can help actually shape it in the long term. That's their goal and what they're focused on right now. And what we're hoping is that the Global Methodist Church will be a church that is committed to making disciples of Jesus Christ, who worship passionately, who love extravagantly, and who witness boldly to Jesus Christ, and that we encourage one another to keep each other well informed, and that we always pray for one another in the strong name of Jesus Christ. So I'm going to end my remarks right there, and hopefully I've left a decent amount of time, Gabby, for a Q&A period, okay?